But people kept rejecting them and saying, no, we don't want to do that. Moses, you've heard of some of those names. So finally, God said that the only way they're going to understand is if I come to the earth in myself and let them see what life is about. So as Christians, we call that the incarnation. Incarnation, and that means putting on flesh. And basically it means God came in human flesh. God put on a skin and walked down the streets of Palestine in the dust and really got to be here for 33 years in the person of Jesus, his son. And the story that really helps me understand that is a story about this family. It's Christmas Eve. They live not too far away from a church, and the mom and the kids go to church, and the father doesn't really believe, and he says, I'm just going to stay home. And he stays home, and they have this big porch, this big room that has glass in it, and it's snowing outside, and it's really bad, and these birds kept flying and beating into the glass, and he felt really bad for them. So he said, well, I'll just go outside and try to shoo them to this shed I have in the back of our house, our property, and they'll be safe in there. It'll be nice, dry, and warm, and some food. And he just couldn't get them to do it. He tried everything he could to get them to go, and they wouldn't go there. So finally he said, oh my goodness, if I could just become a bird, I could explain to them what I'm trying to do, and then they can follow me into the shed. And then, suddenly it's like a light bulb went off for him. That's the incarnation. God became flesh, became one of us, and then Jesus modeled for us the way that we're supposed to live life. So the incarnation is a really big deal for Christianity. What happened after that, though, was that people thought it was all about a bunch of rules. And with the Jewish people, Jesus was Jewish, they all thought that we had to keep all these special rules, and if you kept these rules, then you were right with God. And there was a group of leaders called the Pharisees. And they said there were three things you needed to do to be right with God. You had to keep a kosher kitchen. There were certain foods you could eat and certain foods you couldn't eat. You had to be circumcised, and back in those days, if you were a male, on the 8th day, they would do the circumcision on the male. And then the last one was you had to keep the Sabbath day. You weren't able to work and do things like that. And Jesus came along and said, no, that's not what it's about. It's not about keeping a bunch of rules. It's all about having a relationship with God. And God really doesn't care what's on the outside. He cares what's on the inside, which is in your heart. And then the last thing I would say about that is that he told a story about the prodigal son. And there was this dad who had two sons. And one of them was kind of wild and rebellious. And he just said, Dad, I want my money. I want the money I'm going to inherit when you die. And the father said, fine. He gave him the money. He went off on his own and started doing all kinds of bad things and drinking and sex and just crazy stuff that really wasn't good. And his friends liked him because he had all this money. But then suddenly, when the money was all gone, his friends were all gone. And he had no more money, and he ended up working for a farmer feeding the pigs. And then one day he decided, wow, my father his workers make more money and eat better than I do. I think I'll go back home. And he went back home, and his father loved him. So I'm coming. He turned around, ran out to him, took off his coat, gave it to him, took off his ring, gave him his sandals, and said, my son who was once lost is now found, and come back home. And so that's a big part. It's what we call grace. And grace is that God loves us. And there's nothing that you and I have to do to earn God's love. So that's huge for me, that God loves every single person. We don't have to earn his love. So when I was just a few years older than you, when I was about 15, I came to understand that. I was with a bunch of young people. We went off to this event, and someone got up and told the story where Jesus said, I came that you might have life in all of its abundance, life in all its fullness. And I said, man, there's something I'm missing inside. I don't want to miss it. So then I prayed to God and then became a Christian, asking the Spirit to come and live inside of me. And I did that when I was about 15. And, people thought, oh, that'll wear off after a couple of years, but it really hasn't. And that's kind of the deal. So the Spirit lives within me, and my purpose in life is to try to help other people on their spiritual journey. Very accepting of where you are, and if you're Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist, whatever. Our job is not to condemn, criticize other people. It's to help them along the journey. Take everybody where they are and let them know God loves them. There's nothing they can do to make God stop loving them. He just wants to love you and care for you and show you a good way to live. And it's kind of an exciting thing to do, and I feel very, very privileged to get to spend my life doing that.